do not let what family, friends, society, and I'm using that in quotes, whatever, don't let that factor into how you build your life, and stop waiting. Because usually when you're waiting, it's out of fear, and fear ain't worth a damn.
Welcome to The Next Best Thing. I'm your host, Andrea Cline-Thomas. Now, this is a podcast about creating strategies to navigate career and life transitions. And as we like to say around here, a pivot and a plan B, well, those are just not required. Today, we're talking about the next in your life, specifically motherhood, especially when it doesn't meet the conventional standards or timelines. Now, before we dive into the episode, though, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any of our amazing conversations. Now, our guest today is Richelle Carey, and she's a forever journalist. You may remember her as the anchor of CNN's headline news for 7 years. Then she went over to Al Jazeera America, which eventually led her to live in Doha, Qatar. It's a job Richelle loved, and she lived, child, she really lived, frequenting Dubai, Venice, Ethiopia, other amazing places across the world. But something, or rather someone, was missing. Richelle gave it all up to pursue single motherhood by choice at 50, moving back in with her parents in Houston to eventually become a mother to her sweet little boy, Avery. Richelle, I'm so happy you're here. And thank you just for your transparency about this topic. Like, a lot of people really don't talk about this publicly.
First of all, Andrea, that was a wonderful introduction. Thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation. I was a little hesitant to put so much of my personal life out there, but once I started, it actually just got easier and easier to talk about it because so many people were so receptive and wanted to know more. So thanks for the invitation to talk more about things like this.
Oh, it's so important. Once you had that article in Exo Nicole, it got my friends talking, like in the group chat. We were all talking about it. And I really want to start long before you move back home. And I do want to say, too, because you have been so brave and being so open, this is something that's also I'm considering and kind of started the process on. I'm 41 years old and trying to figure this thing out because motherhood is something that I really want in my life. And I'm just trying to figure out what it's going to look like for me. And your path is something that I'm very, very open to. So talk to us about, though, you always wanted to be a mother. And at 38, 39, 40, 41, what were you telling yourself about what your options were at that time regarding motherhood?
I did always want to be a mother, but it wasn't something that was ever top of mind for me. It wasn't ever anything that I put a lot of thought into. There are some people, even my cousin got married very young. We're only 5 months apart. She got married in her 20s, had babies right away. That was something that was very important to her. And I wanted those things, but I was just running after job, and I thought, oh, that'll just happen. Like, just happen. It doesn't have to be now, it'll just happen when it happens. And then, as you mentioned, some of those numbers, those ages, as I kept ticking off on the calendar, I was like, well, maybe it should have happened by now. Or, biology is what it is. And I would start to, I wouldn't say panic attacks, but I would start to have a bit of anxiety. Like sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night and I'd be like, I'm gonna die alone. Like literally, I'd be like, I'm missing my opportunities. I'm not in a serious relationship except. So I think when I was 40, well, back up. When I was in my 30s, you mentioned CNN headline news. That's when I was living in Atlanta. And I specifically remember when I was working in St. Louis, I got the job at Headline News to move to Atlanta. And I remember thinking, oh, it's going to happen now.
Here, right?
Atlanta. It is like Black Disneyland. This is it. I'm like,
Right,
I'm not
right.
even going to have to try. It's just going to happen. And having said that, obviously it didn't, because you do still have to try some. And that's a whole other thing to unpack is, what are you actually doing to make the things happen that you say you want to happen? And what kind of choices are you making? So whatever various choices got me to 42, and I still wasn't engaged, wasn't dating anybody seriously. And I was like, okay, I just need a little more time. So that's when I froze my eggs. Now, this is something a friend of mine and mentioned to me when I was in my 30s, because she did PR for one of the more prominent fertility clinics in the country. And I remember thinking, I don't need that. That's crazy. I'm not going to freeze my eggs. I'm like, I got time. And also it's really expensive. And this was a while ago. It's still expensive, but it's come down, but it was very expensive then. So then by the time I hit 42, and I still wasn't getting any closer to having a family, and I was making really good money, I was like, you know what? Let me buy myself a little more time. Now, this is what you and I can unpack, because this is roughly the age we're talking about. I remember thinking, if I have this money, maybe I should just go ahead and do IVF right now by myself. And Andrea, I just did not want to be a single mom. I just didn't. So that's why I thought, and even though, freezing your eggs at 42 isn't the best decision, it's obviously better to do it younger. But I was like, you know what? I just need to give myself a little more time. So I froze my 42-year-old eggs, knowing that once I used them, the chances of it working would be low, but it would be better than nothing.
Right.
So let me see. So I froze my eggs at 42, and then between 42 and 46, nothing happened. So at 46 is when I decided I don't want to keep waiting, because it felt like I was giving my power to some imaginary person, like waiting to be a mom because I was waiting on a partner. And while that was important to me, I kind of had this epiphany where I was like, I have done big things on my own. I have moved to cities on the spur of a moment for a job. I moved to another country for a job as a single woman. I'm like, let's just do this. Now, as I said, at this point, I was still single. So that meant picking sperm from a sperm bank. It still feels weird when I say that out loud.
Right.
It just still somehow feels like either I'm watching a TV show or living a TV show, and it shouldn't be. It should be as normal as talking about anything else. But it's still, when I thought I would have a traditional route, and then I ended up there, it took a minute to click. And then to really realize that it's okay. It's fine. So I did try IVF. And I didn't have a lot of eggs because, as I said, I froze them at 42. And I think I had like 5 eggs, only of which like 3 were usable. And the IVF didn't work.
That's actually a good ratio, though.
Well, agree. For my age, I agree.
Consider, yeah. Yes.
No, that's a fair point. And I guess I'm just thinking of in the context, like I know somebody who did it in her 30s and she got something like 20 something eggs.
Yeah, it's crazy.
But it just, the drop off is not subtle. The drop off is like drastic.
Yeah, it's drastic, like going off of a cliff, and you don't know until you go to the doctor.
That part.
And so, because I did mine last year, and I was just like, why didn't anybody ever tell me about this? And the consultation was basically like, this probably won't work. Like at the end of it, it was like, I asked her, I said, why should I even do this? And she's like, well, I just have to be, honest with you as your doctor and stuff like that. But just in terms of a woman's fertility, like they don't tell you this in your women's visit at all. This is never brought up, but the cliff is real.
It is real. And I think it's something I actually did have, now that I think about it, I remember an OBGYN that I had when I was in Atlanta. And I did ask her. So this would have been when I was still in my 30s. I turned 40 while I was in Atlanta. So I'm still in my 30s, early 40s. And I did ask her. Um, and she basically, and God bless her, I think she just didn't want me to panic, but she's like, you'll be fine. Okay. And I think also what plays into women being shocked by how much fertility drops off is that we see so many famous women in their 40s having children, and a lot of them, because they don't owe us their private business,
Hmm.
a lot of us aren't aware of what they went through to actually have that child, right? And
Right.
it's great when they do feel like talking about it. Gabrielle Union has been just super transparent about what her journey has been, and that's fantastic. I think so many women appreciate that, but I also understand when a woman doesn't feel like she
Mhm.
owes the world a story of how she got her child. But I do think it kind of gives us a distorted view of the fact we think that it may be easier to get pregnant in your 40s than it actually is.
Right.
So I'm glad your doctor. I know you were probably like, "Why you're such a Debbie Downer?" But but I don't you appreciate the fact that she did kind
Yeah.
of lay it out there for you?
Yeah, and then she was just like, "I'm on your team. We're gonna do the best we can." And it's like one of the best doctors in New York City. But when I lived in Philly, and I was about to turn 35, I asked my like doctor just in a well women's visit, like, "All right, I'm about to turn 35. I know I've heard about fertility and like how it drops off. Like, what do I need to do?" Is
Hmm.
there anything like she should have just, I would have appreciated if she was just like have the, what is it, the AMH, the blood test to,
Hmm.
look at your ovarian reserve and at least have a baseline to see if those numbers are changing drastically to help you,
Sure.
whatever. And she was like, "You'll be fine. It's not going to be a big deal." That's what
Oh.
she told me too. And I was just like, and I actually had enough money then to be able
Mhm.
to do something then with 35-year-old eggs as opposed to 39-year-old eggs, almost 40-year-old. So it's just stuff like that. I just want to say out loud for people listening that that's something that they should really, really consider um,
And we
asking for
should
certain
say this
things.
out loud. You and I
Yeah.
both should say, and this is not a disparaging remark against medical professionals. My whole family's in medicine. It's not that. But I do think the more we talk about these things, hopefully the field of fertility can grow and evolve and get better and serve women better because they need to know what is and isn't working for us.
Hmm. No, 100%. You
Um,
were saying
oh,
that you didn't want to be a single mother.
mhm.
Um, Tell me about grappling with that. For what was the switch for
Mm.
you for when you're like, I don't really want to be a single mother. Like if this is my route, this is, what I'll do. But when did you become okay with, all right, we gotta,
Because
be more
I was getting
actionable?
older. I was getting and I was getting older, and it was also that um, financially um, I could do it. So I didn't want to be a single mom for many reasons. Just because I'm my parents are still together. I'm very fortunate. That's what I grew up with. That's what I knew. Right. Um, but it wasn't necessarily a matter of I needed somebody else's income to make this happen. So that actually was a factor that I was like, well, I can actually afford to do this. Um, and I actually had at that point come in and out of a not great relationship. And there was also something at play that I was like, maybe it's not the end of the world to do this single because I don't have to run anything by anybody. So I was like, you know what? There are millions of single women in the world that are doing great. Yeah, would you prefer two incomes? Well, who wouldn't prefer two incomes, right? But it just felt like I was living scared, and I didn't want to do that. And it was also that I felt like the longer I was waiting, I didn't want to be, in my 50s as a first time mom. And that's only because, I'm not fault. I clearly I support anybody at any age becoming a mom, but it was coming down to I wanted to be alive as long as possible for my child. So it just felt like the clock was ticking, Andrea, and I was like, come on, enough.
Yeah. And so while you were in Doha and well, when did you do IVF? Was it
Okay.
in
So I was living in Doha then, and I took time off and came back home to Houston to have the procedure. So I had actually had my eggs frozen when I was living in New York. And as I mentioned, all my family's in medicine. So my dad worked with a fertility specialist here in Houston, and talked to him. So he was going to do the IVF. So I had to have my eggs flown from New York to Houston. And then I picked a sperm donor from a sperm bank in California. So then they had to send the sperm. So all this, like, we're both from news. Imagine a graphic with like a map,
right, right,
right? So there's Houston, there's New York, there's California. Okay. And then me in Doha. Okay.
right.
And then we all come together in Houston, right? So I took time off, and my job was actually incredibly supportive. And I came home, and let me get this right. So the plan was to do the IVF, but before you do it, you have to take some shots and pills like to get ready for it, right?
Hmm.
And then the day that they were going to do it, there was something, I can't remember what it was. There was some test that wasn't at the level they wanted it to be. So they wanted me to extend this regimen of pills and shots. So that meant extending the time I was home. So by the time from beginning to end of having the procedure, I think I was home maybe 4 or 5 weeks. My job was
Hmm.
great. So I had the IVF done, and then I flew back to work, and I had the pregnancy test done in Doha. And my mom came back with me. So I found out while I was in Doha that it didn't work.
Hmm.
And at that point, like I said, I think I was 46. So it just did not make sense. I couldn't justify spending money on trying to get another egg retrieval when the chances of me getting any eggs or any usable eggs were small. It could happen. And I made decent money, but it didn't make sense to me to keep spending my money on that when if I was going to pivot to adoption, that I needed to use my money for something else. So I was sad, but I wasn't devastated because I had already in my mind tried to be as level headed and as practical as possible about the chances of it working. And I knew it was a long shot, and I tried it, and I'm glad I tried it.
Hmm.
So, yeah. So then at this point, so yeah, I'm in Doha at this point. And then I pivoted to adoption from there, to starting the adoption process.
Was that always kind of part of like, okay, if this doesn't work, then we'll do adoption? That was always kind of the plan.
Yes. And in some ways, yes, it was always. I never felt like I wanted to be a mom, and it would have been nice to biologically be a mom, but it was never something I felt like a strong yearning for. But I also think, and this just occurs to me as I'm talking this through with you, um, it was easier, I think, for me to pivot to the adoption thing because it was just me making the decision. Whereas if you're in a couple, there's two of you, and you all are both going to have to decide, like, do we want to try the IVF again? It may mean more to one than to the other. Or, I can see that being a much more fraught decision for a couple. And I have a lot of empathy for people who have to make that decision and then sometimes try over and over again. But I can just say for me, with me being the only person I had to consult with, I was like, you know what, let's just go on to the next thing. So that's what I did.
When I was doing egg freezing, one of the things that was the hardest was just, I mean, like the actual giving yourself the shot. I just remember like the
Right.
first day that was
Oh,
always
girl.
like, I called my one of my best friends is a doctor, and I was just like trying to have her talk me through it and give me a pep talk because I was just like, I can't even. But it also like just made me confront of like, I didn't think I was going to be here. This is not what I thought my life would be in this moment. And just had like I remember when I got all the medication that they sent it to me, and I'm opening it up to like, separate it. And that's when I just had a whole breakdown because I was just like, I didn't even think that this would be it. This is not what I expected for myself. How did you reconcile that?
Um, I understand that. I get that. And I actually hadn't thought about that in a while until you just described that. And I do remember having moments where I remember when I was doing, before the egg retrieval, when you're doing the shots and et cetera, what ended up happening is I ended up having to go to the ER, and that sounds more dramatic than it was, but is when the doctor, when it was time to do the egg retrieval, same thing with the what do you call it?
Egg freezing.
Same thing with the fertilization. Back up. I'm sorry. So yeah, when it was time to retrieve the eggs, same thing. He was like, well, we're close, but there's some numbers that I want. So he had me do about an extra few days of shots and pills, and I ended up really bloated. So I had to go to the ER. And I remember in the emergency room having a moment where I was like, I'm sitting here bloated from giving myself shots, and I'm here all by myself. I'm not even in a city where my family lives. Like, I just was like, what? It wasn't supposed to be like this. Yes, I did have that. And it would pop up every now and then, but I think that was a moment. And I'm not one for, I don't talk a whole lot about my feelings. I mean, you wouldn't know that by, obviously now I tell everybody my business, but when I was going through this, like even when I did the egg freezing, I didn't tell my parents I did it until I was literally in the doctor's office, and I called them and I'm like, so guess what I did? Because I guess I felt like if I talked a lot about it, that made it harder to bury what you were feeling.
Right.
And once you start talking, it just, like, word salads and emotions just pour out from you, which isn't a bad thing. But once you do that, you feel like you almost can't control it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And did you have anybody to talk to who understood what you were going through?
I did have friends who had done it, but I didn't really talk to them a whole lot about it. I told my mom just because I was going to go under anesthesia, for the retrieval. I was like, let me just go ahead and tell my mom. So there's, whatever. Right. But my friend who's a doctor, she's just very much like, oh, I've got a friend who's got 3 kids on her own. Here's her phone number. She said you could call her and talk to her. She's just like, whatever. She's like, do whatever it takes. You'll never be ready. You'll never feel ready. Just do whatever, whenever you're ready, and it's fine. And she just kind of talked me through like the shots. And then I kind of go into news mode in my mind of like, this is just what you have to do to get it done. Count to 3. 1, 2, 3, go. You just have to do it.
You will never be ready. I mean,
you
will. It's literally like let's talk about news. Like, if there's breaking news that's happening, you just have to start talking. Even if you don't know what the whole story is, start talking about what you do know. You just jump in. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what we're both describing is you will never be as ready as you think you need to be, but you just have to start.
Right. So that's how I felt. I was just like, let me just do this. I don't know what the subsequent steps are. I don't know when or if I'll use these whatever. Let me just go ahead and do it. And I'll just deal with whatever I need to deal with whenever it comes. I'm not going to think about scenarios or whatever. Just all I know is this is what we need to do right now.
Exactly.
But the adoption process, because it's a whole process that I was just not even aware of until reading about your story of having to hire a social worker while you're in Doha.
The IVF and all that was almost easier. I'm not even kidding. It is. I was very lucky in that I was able to hire someone who was an adoption consultant. And basically what she does is helps you through the process. She will help find an agency for you that will work with you and then take you through the whole process. And so for example, I had to decide, did I want to adopt internationally or American? And I really did want to adopt an American child. And I'm from Texas. So I wanted to work with the Texas agency. But there are a bazillion, and that is an official number, a bazillion number of adoption agencies in the state of Texas. I don't even know where to start. So I was fortunate enough and privileged enough to be able to hire an adoption consultant. So the issue was finding an agency that would work with me. And it wasn't necessarily that I was single, although there are still some agencies that don't work with single women. But by and large, that's not really the way it used to be. The issue was agencies were like, well, she lives in another country. I don't even know how. They felt like they didn't know how to do that, even though it really would be no different than if I were in the US. So my agency finally found, my adoption consultant rather, finally found one agency in the entire state of Texas that was like, yeah, we can do this, because they had a client they had helped before who lived in Italy.
Mm.
So found the adoption agency, then had to start the paperwork. And as I joke about how extensive the paperwork is, but I'm like, well, they're giving you a person, so okay. But it is a tax returns, criminal background checks, and I'd lived in so many states, so that took forever.
Hmm.
Recommendation. I mean, it is a journey to get all this paperwork done. And that was another moment where I'm like, I'm going through this, doing all this paperwork alone. That I had a moment like that too, and it would be nice to be able to vent to somebody and get support from somebody who understood and was doing all this with me. But I had to persevere. And then I also had to go to Austin, and because the agency I was working with had a mandatory seminar that everybody had to go to that was a prospective adoptive parent. So from beginning to end, from starting the process to actually getting approved, that was maybe a year, I want to
Wow.
say. I think, and then from there, so from the beginning to actually starting the paperwork to actually getting Avery was probably 2.5 years,
Wow.
maybe I want to say. And along the way my agency worked, and all agencies aren't the same way. What they will do is when a birth mother or birth parents come in, and they have an intake form, they get all this information, and then they will send it to their clients. And you could say if you want your adoption profile to be presented to the birth parents, right? And sometimes you say yes, sometimes you say no. There's various reasons why you may pass. And then finally, there was a child, and I'm like, oh, yeah, I send this. It was actually a couple, and I said, yeah, submit my adoption profile to them, and they didn't pick me, and I was like, oh, um, I was a little bummed about that. But what I tried to tell myself was, you know, then that wasn't my child.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
part of the calculation that I was told was that they were concerned that I lived out of the country. Now, that doesn't really matter, because in the grand scheme of things, once I'm the parent, I'm the parent. And if we do have an open adoption where I have agreed that you can still have some contact with the child, I'm going to be back in the US. So that didn't really matter. But it also comes down to, birth parents are entitled to have any criteria that matters to them. This is the most important decision they'll ever make. So at first I
Hmm.
was annoyed, and then I was like, wait a minute. This is a huge thing. Whatever works for them or doesn't. But what it did for me, Andrea, is I was like, you know what? Maybe this is a sign that I do need to go home, just to make, so that there's no barriers, nothing standing in the way of me being there and ready and available when my child is actually born. And when I moved home, quit my job, moved home, and within about 7 months of me moving home is when I got matched with Avery. So
Yeah.
it worked out.
Yeah, we'll go back to the whole quitting your job, but I want to just
Okay.
have you talk about laying eyes on Avery. What was that moment when you guys were together?
So my parents and I were driving to Dallas because I got matched with him very quickly. I got a call on a Saturday. I remember I was walking out of the gym, and it was my agency saying, and at this point, when I moved, so I was working with an agency based in Austin. When I moved home, my adoption consultant said, I also want you to get with this other agency, because now that you're in Houston, they don't mind working with you. And this is an agency based in Dallas. So that's the agency that actually got me Avery. So they
Hmm.
called me on a Saturday and said, we have a birth mother, and her child has already been born. Often you get matched while the birth mother's still pregnant. And they said, her baby's about 5.5, 6 weeks old. We want to show her your profile, but we don't want to show it to her unless you're really in a position to take a child like right away. And I didn't have anything, Andrea. Like, I had not done any shopping. I didn't have a pacifier because I thought that I would have time. And I said, sure, go ahead and show it to her. So they showed it to her and then called me a few hours later and they were like, well, she wants to meet you. Can you get to Dallas tomorrow? So my parents and I drove to Dallas. And while we're driving to Dallas and texting, and I said, I'm on my way, I said, can you send me a picture? So they sent me a picture of him. But then we got to Dallas and we met at a restaurant. And that's when I first saw him. And he's the cutest thing I've ever seen in my life. I didn't cry because it almost felt kind of out of body again. Like, I can't, like, is this all going to happen this fast? And then the next day, I think it was, I called the agency and I said, yeah, if she wants to do this, I want to do this. And then by Wednesday, I had him.
Wow.
I know. And during that time, my parents and I went back to Houston, and then my mom and I are like running through Target, just throwing stuff in a basket so we can, like, he has something to sleep in, and all, like, it was like that. And then we went back on that Wednesday and got him, and I've had him ever since then.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. That's amazing. Like, what an incredible journey.
Yeah.
For you leaving your job, you loved it. You loved your job.
It was hard and not hard. It was time to leave. I mean, I had moved away from Houston when I was 27, 26. So I hadn't lived in Houston in forever. I mean, it's the nature of our job and having to move from city to city. So it was fine. It was time. But I think we also both know that good, stable jobs in this business are hard to come by and are getting harder and harder to come by. And I was treated well there. No place is perfect, but I was treated well. I made good money, which was important for me being single. I liked what I did. I got to travel. I mean, it was a good life, and it was not easy to leave that. Particularly not having anything lined up. Like, I wasn't leaving and moving back home to a job. I was leaving with the intention of taking some time off, which is also scary because you don't know when or how you're going to get back in the business, or even if you want to get back in the business. Don't know. But it just felt like it was time. And I don't have any regrets. I do have things that I miss about it. Career transition, as we call it, is nerve-wracking, particularly when I'm not an entrepreneur by nature. I'm just not. I was perfectly happy getting a big fat check from the man. So I'm just telling the truth. So this phase that I'm in now is stretching me and challenging me. I'm scared sometimes. Other times I'm inspired. But I'm having to push myself. And I have moved out of my parents' garage apartment. That should be the headline. That should be. I only live like 3 minutes away, but I no longer live in my parents' garage apartment. Avery and I do have our own space. But I am still navigating what my next steps are going to be. But sometimes you just have to. And sometimes I look around and I'm like, well, they did it. I can do it too. So.
And you're now navigating it as a mother. It's a completely different perspective.
That part too. Because I mean, I know these are things that people tell you and you know them intellectually, but until you live it, you're like, these kids are like, they think I'm an ATM machine. Like, he's 2.5 and he's in his preschool, right? And then he has soccer, which is extra. And then he has swimming. And then I just signed him up for a music class. And I'm like, this already started at 2.5. I'm not going to have any money ever again. But I don't even think about it. Like, that's not true. I think about it, but I don't resent it. You're like, if I never buy another pair of red bottoms, I don't care. As long as he has everything he needs. I don't care.
Yeah. That's so great. So what does your next look like right now?
Um,
Besides
I am, well, who isn't, but I am building a podcast.
Mhm.
But and actually I am learning a lot from you right now. It's just I'm loving talking to you. But I am trying to build a newscast. I mean, I'm sorry. No, not newscast. No.
Not
Uh,
newscast, not newscast. Yeah.
no. A
No.
podcast
Yeah.
with some of the similar themes that you and I are
Mhm.
talking about. But I think I want to gear it specifically to moms.
Mhm.
Um, and I feel like there is an audience there also for women that want to become moms, but I think I'm trying to
Yes.
gear it to women and mothers in our age range specifically because there's an increasing number of us.
Yes.
So I think that that's the space I'm trying to navigate. I'm potentially going to be doing something with a communications consulting firm.
Mhm.
And yes, I am pitching my life story to some producers too, because it's interesting. I said before that it was a little daunting at first for me to talk about something so personal, but one of my friends who's a journalist was the one that was like, I'm calling Essence, you need to talk about this. And then once I did, as I said, the response has been tremendous. And then people have said to me, like, what's next? Like, I'm invested in your story. What's next? And
Mhm.
I'm like,
Mhm.
okay, so yes, I have been trying to talk to some Hollywood types about, particularly potentially getting my story out there, but it's a writer's strike. So,
Oh, right, right.
um, but I am still, yeah, I just think that based on the response I've got, there are women that want to know stories like what my journey has been. And I will talk about it till the end of time if it helps other people.
I'm invested. I'm 100%
Well, I'm invested in
completely
you too, sweetie.
completely invested. I've got friends, so we're all invested because it's just not discussed, and we're just a new generation where
Yep.
we're defining womanhood differently,
Yes, ma'am.
motherhood differently. What's the thing that surprised you the most about being a mature mom?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and I guess what's also the hardest part? Because one of my biggest concerns is like, man, like, am I gonna have the energy? Am I gonna have the
Okay.
energy to keep up with this little person? I'm tired now on my
No,
own.
I remember a colleague of mine at Headline News had three. Actually, she had two, and then she got pregnant with her third and unplanned when she was in her 40s. And I remember asking her, I was like, I said, "Are you just tired?" I'm like, "You and I do the same job, and then you go home to kids." And I get to just go home and lay on the sofa if I want to.
Right.
And I remember her saying to me, you just do it. She's like, you don't actually, she's like, there's just a switch that'll flip and you don't actually even entertain not going home and doing what you need to do. So you don't even think about what your other life was, right?
Mhm.
That is actually true. And something you said too, that we're redefining motherhood and womanhood. There are 40s and 50s isn't what it used to be,
Right. It's
right?
not.
It's not. So what I try to do is be as healthy as I can, exercise as much as I can, so that I can be as physically present for him. Right. I mean, it is what it is. I'm going to be much older when he graduates from college, but I owe it to both of us to be as healthy as I can. Am I tired sometimes? Yes. But happy tired, if that makes any kind of sense.
Mm. What surprised you most about this journey?
How smart they are even before they can put full sentences together.
Mm.
It's like the things that he is aware of, and that how quickly they do start to grow. Again, one of those things intellectually that people tell you, but it's different to see it in person. Like he's 2.5 now. It feels like literally every day he's got new words or his pronunciation is getting more clear. Like every day it is something new. It is amazing to see. But then you also kind of wanted to stop because you get scared. You're like, oh my God, the train is out of the like, what have I done? I mean, I'm like, if he's this smart at 2.5, God darn it, I can't undo this. But it's
Yeah.
also pretty amazing to get to see up close.
And I just have a superficial question
Sure.
to ask. With the other preschool moms, it's like a running joke that my friends have. I was just like, I'm gonna be the oldest mom
So,
with the kindergartner. Like, will I
mhm,
even talk to these other mothers of the other
mhm.
kids that are supposed to be the friends? You know what I mean?
I
Like,
do. I do. So people ask me sometimes, they're like, are you in a mommy and me group? And I'm like, first of all, if you knew me, you wouldn't ask me that because no, I'm not. I absolutely am not. I don't know if it's the only child in me, but I was like, oh, whatever. But I can say that having talking more about this and getting all these messages from women, it actually does make me kind of be more open to that type of community because I love the women that reach out to me, but I'm not specifically in a mommy and me group. But I'm going to tell you this, Miss Andrea, we are always going to look younger and
younger.
better than I don't care. Just remember that. Put me up against any 30-something-year-old mom. I don't care. You hear me? Okay. So just hold on to that. Whatever. Fine. You can't. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what my
And
friends
you know
always
it
say.
too. I
Right, right,
mean, you
right.
needed me to say it, but you know it.
That's so funny. No, that's good. That's good to hear. That's good to hear. The last segment we call ACT UP, ACT, those are my initials. So
Okay.
it's for the unconventional mothers out there. You're in your 40s, beyond. What can you do right now? You want to be a mom, you're not a mom yet. What would you say? What would your advice be to get from where you are to where you want to be as a mother?
Uh, to not waste time. And if you are stuck, ask yourself why you're stuck. And if you are stuck because of external forces, they don't matter. If it's something internal, then you need to deal with that and unpack that and get moving. But I cannot stress enough that do not let what family, friends, society, and I'm using that in quotes, whatever, don't let that factor into how you build your life, and stop waiting. Because usually when you're waiting, it's out of fear, and fear ain't worth a damn. It ain't worth a
Mm.
damn.
Michelle, this is how can we support you? How can we follow you?
Stop. You are just the cutest. Let's see here. Well, I do have a website, RichelleCarey.com. I'm on all the socials on Instagram. I was going to say Twitter, but let's rest in
Yeah,
peace, Twitter.
you're right.
Um,
I got an account and I don't
yeah,
use it.
I am trying to build more with the Instagram. I am finally on the tickety talk with the kids.
Oh, you're so good.
Girl,
I'm
I
trying to
fought it.
get
I
back.
fought it. I fought it. But so I'm trying. But yeah,
Mhm.
and actually, what I would really love is if you go to my website, there's a place that you can sign up for an email list because I'm working on eventually getting some sort of newsletter together. So in the meantime, if people go to my website, RichelleCarey.com, they can see a place that they can, sign up to be part of the community that I'm building. And I appreciate all the follows on social. I respond to messages. I read the messages. I absolutely, I am really loving connecting with other women. I love it.
Thank you so much for this.
Thank
These are
you.
the words that I needed to hear. Personally, like this means so, so, so much. And just normalizing it in just a different, just a different way. And it just, I'm gonna make some decisions. I'm gonna make
Okay,
some
and you
decisions.
you hit me up too.
I
Like
will hit
you
you up. I absolutely will.
anybody that's listening that wants to ask me questions, I've had people message me and ask me very personal questions, ask me what adoption agency, all of that. I will respond to those messages, any type of questions, or people can just email me at hello@RichelleCarey.com. I promise you, I'll respond.
No, this is great. Thank you so much for your time. I
All right,
so
sweetheart.
appreciate it.
I
So
love this
appreciate
conversation,
it.
and I am invested
Yeah,
in you as well.